Good morning. I'm Samantha, a tailor here for the Jamestown-Yorktown Foundation. Why don't you join me inside as we talk about how a woman would get dressed here on our Revolutionary Era farm. So I'm starting out in the basic sort of undergarments for a woman in the 18th century, and the primary one is a linen shift, and it reaches to my elbows. It has a low neckline to match the necklines of fashionable outer garments like gowns, jackets, that sort of thing, and it reaches to below my knee. It's made out of linen, so it's very washable, and it'll help keep my outer clothing clean because it's right next to my skin, absorbing sweat and dirt from the body. So the linen shift can get washed and I don't have to wash the outer clothing. Over that, I'm wearing an under petticoat, which is just one of the basic undergarment layers for a woman. This one is made out of a mock quilted fabric, so it's intended to look like it's been quilted, but it's actually just woven that way. And that just provides a little extra bit of warmth. The next thing that I'm going to put on are my stays. And the stays you might think of as the grandmother of what we think of as the corset in the 19th century. And stays are worn by all classes of women in the 18th century, from the poor to elite. They give support to the chest and back, which can be very helpful, especially for a woman who's working, because it gives her that extra support to help keep her safe while she's lifting heavy things such as firewood or water, in the same way that you might see people working today wearing supportive back braces. They aren't intended to cinch in the waist, they're just intended to smooth the silhouette, smooth the torso of the woman into a fashionable shape, and as I said, provide support to the body. So I'm going to lace these up. And because they lace in the back, I'm actually going to put them on backwards and lace them up first. There's sort of a myth that goes around often that a back lacing garment could only be worn by a wealthy woman because she would need assistance to get dressed. But an important thing to remember is that people in the 18th century lived with a different idea of privacy than we do today. So most people are living with their family members. So even if a woman didn't have servants, she would still have a husband, a sister, a mother, someone to help her get dressed if she needed it. And even if you were a servant living and working in someone else's household, you would probably have other servants in that household who could also help you, again, if you needed it. But it is very possible to dress yourself in back lacing stays. You just have to kind of know the tricks for it. So 18th century stays were the product of a sort of subset of the tailoring trade that focused entirely on stay making. So most stay makers were actually men, and that's really because it requires a lot of physical force to make stays. You have to be able to stitch heavy layers of fabric together and also be able to process the baleen that is a very common stiffener for stays during the 18th century. And baleen is a keratin substance similar to your fingernails or to hair, so it's very flexible. And this comes from the baleen whale's mouth. They're these plates that have these little fringes that hang down that help them catch their food, which is primarily krill and little sea creatures like that. So the baleen helps them filter it in their mouth, and that is a substance that is really the favored substance for stiffening stays during the 18th century. Obviously today, that's not something that we want to use for our stays, so we either use metal boning, very thin pieces of metal, or synthetic whalebone, which is a special type of plastic that mimics the properties of baleen. So one of the primary characteristics that we want to copy from baleen is the fact that when it becomes heated, just through body heat, it starts to mold to the figure. So it makes it incredibly comfortable because the garment is shaping to you. So it's sort of like breaking in a new pair of shoes. The shoes get more comfortable the more that you wear them, and the more that they get broken in and mold to your foot. And that's really how we want a pair of stays to feel, is like a good pair of shoes. You don't want your shoes to be too tight or they hurt, but you also don't want them to be too loose because that'll cause blisters and your foot and ankle won't be supported. So you want your stays to fit like a nice pair of shoes. The next piece that I'm going to put on is a pocket. In the 18th century, pockets are completely separate garments. And this is actually really nice because they can be nice and big, and I can just put on my pocket every day and know that I have everything in my pocket instead of having to take something out and put it into another garment. And a woman can wear one pocket or have two, one on either side, to have a matching set, and more places to put just important personal items that you might want to keep close at hand. Because it's on my body and under my other clothing, it's pretty secure. I would definitely know if someone was trying to pick my pocket. Now I'm going to put an outer petticoat on, and petticoats in the 18th century tend to be made with a front and a back. So I'm first going to tie the back of the petticoat around my waist. And then I'm going to bring up the front of the petticoat, kind of like I'm tying an apron. And then tie the petticoat in the back. And because the petticoat is open on the side, I can reach in and access everything that's in my pocket. Now I'm going to put on a kerchief. And kerchiefs are going to add a little extra bit of coverage. In the winter, they add some nice warmth. In the summer, they're going to protect the skin of my neck and chest from the sun, since we don't have chemical sunscreens like we use today. We're going to use fabric to help shield us from the sun. And you see a lot of these printed and colored kerchiefs being worn by lower or working class people. Higher up on the scale, we'll have fine white linen or cotton or even silk kerchiefs to wear. But this is going to be good for working out on the farm today. Women who would have worked and lived on a farm like this one had a variety of garments that they could wear on their upper body. Today I'm going to be wearing a bedgown. And the bedgown isn't something that you wear to sleep, but it probably got that name because it was a garment that you would wear after you got out of bed first thing in the morning. But they evolved to be really a very commonplace working garment because it's got a very simple T-shaped cut, kind of like a kimono. So it's nice and loose, and I have a wide range of movement. It's also beneficial because it's not fitted, so that if my body were to change, women became pregnant often during this time period, that this garment could adjust with me because it's not fitted. And I'm just going to cross it over the front of my body. And to keep it in place, I'm now going to tie my apron around my waist. When you look at images from the 18th century, you find that it's most common for women to tie their petticoats in the front of the body. And before I tie my apron strings in a bow, I'm going to slip on my pinball or pin cushion to hang from my apron strings. And pins are a very important part of getting dressed in the 18th century for a woman. As you've seen already, I haven't used any buttons or hooks and eyes in getting dressed. And that's not because they didn't exist, because they are definitely around and certainly used on men's clothing. But the nice thing about being able to use pins or laces like in the stays is that it's very adjustable. And as I mentioned before, women's bodies change pretty frequently with frequent pregnancies, so being to alter your clothing is important and a good way to make that clothing last longer and serve more purposes. So I am going to put a quick pin up here at the top of my bedgown just to make sure it stays in place. If I was wearing a gown with a fitted bodice and an attached skirt, I would use pins to close the front of the gown. A lot of people worry that pins might lead to you poking yourself, and that does happen on occasion, but it's important to remember that I have my stays on underneath. You can even hear them. So they're protecting my body from any stray pins. So for the most part, I don't tend to poke myself. I'm also using my pins to secure the ribbon to my cap, and if it was a blustery day, I could also pin the cap directly to my hair. But today we're doing pretty well. So I'm just about finished getting dressed. This would be perfectly fine if I was working about the house or in the fields and it was a nice warm day. But today we've got a little bit of a chill, so I'm also going to put my cloak on to give me some extra warmth. So this is a red wool cloak, and these were incredibly common and popular during the 18th century. There were other colors that were seen in cloaks like black, purple, and blue, but red was very, very common. It's kind of like the way that blue jeans are the most common color, and it's really what we associate with denim is that indigo blue color. Red was just very popular. It was cheery and warm. And I'm also going to put a straw hat on to go outside. And this is just a simple straw hat trimmed with a little bit of silk ribbon to make it pretty. No matter the class of person that you are in the 18th century, even working class people, everybody wants to be fashionable as much as their means will allow. And so having that nice little bit of silk ribbon is one way to do that.
On my legs, I'm wearing cotton stockings, and they go up over the knee, but since we don't have elastic in the 18th century, I am using woven garters to help hold up my stockings. I like to tie mine below my knees because I find that's the most comfortable, but you also see women tying them above the knee in images. My shoes are made out of woolen fabric that's in imitation of a fabric known as calamanco, and that was an incredibly common material for shoes. Most people think of leather being common for shoes in the 18th century, but when you look at written records and advertisements, calamanco woolen shoes were more common than leather shoes for women during this time period. The shoes are fastened with latchets or straps that cross over the foot, and they're held in place with buckles. This makes them somewhat adjustable. And you can also switch out the buckles for different outfits that you're wearing. They have a little bit of a low heel, nothing too crazy, just enough to be a little fashionable. Now I'm fully dressed and ready to go about my day working on the farm. Thank you for joining us for another Getting Dressed video. We hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, leave us a comment and tell us what you found interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.